Throughout history, tridents, swords, and lances have been popular enough to make it to your fantasy tabletop games. But what about the more obscure weapons, like flying bladed frisbees or specialized shovels used by Shaolin monks? Well, we are here to do them justice and provide interesting options for your D&D games. So, without further ado, here are 10 historical and overpowered weapons that you may have never heard of. Originating from India, a kukri was a large knife or small short sword that holds a distinctive curve that allows for both cutting and chopping. Used as early as the 7th century, its traditional custom was that the blade must always draw blood before being sheathed. Also being considered an evolution of the sickle, it was used by farmers, laborers, and hunters alike. It was a multi-use weapon that spanned from the working man to religious tradition, a versatile weapon good for any kind of character background. But going into a stat block to use for Dungeons and Dragons, it might be interesting for some sort of siege ability, doing more damage to objects. But what might also be handy and maybe fit better is a weapon that helps out with tool checks, as it is a versatile working man's tool, after all. So here's what I would do. Just give it a +1 bonus to some check tools and give it a different weapon mastery to differentiate it from the dagger. Katars are a type of push dagger from India. A push dagger was a dagger that you held between your knuckles, but the Katar took it to the next level. Imagine it sitting on your hand where the stab comes from your punches instead of swings. Gripping its horizontal handle, I think this may just be your strength-based dagger. Its earliest forms originated from the 14th century and quickly became a status symbol worn at the hip of princes and nobles. The Mughal nobility would even hunt tigers with the weapon. There was also iterations where it worked like one of those dinosaur grabber toys where you can squeeze the handle and the face chomps, but instead of grabbing, the blade would split apart, like shears, doing more damage when you punched and snipped or stabbed and spread. Both horribly gruesome ways to die. And if that wasn't enough, they eventually added small pistols to either end, putting triggers just above the handle for a little overkill. This one would be really hard to put into D&D as it does so many things at once, especially once you put pistols on it. But I think adding your modifier to the damage of an offhand attack would be a balanced way to incorporate that extra shearing or small gunpowder blast you might be using. Plus, with the Vex Mastery, you have advantage on attacks with the dagger already inside them. Just pull the trigger. Another Indian blade called the Khanda was a weighted double-edged sword that widened at the tip almost like a spoon, and reinforced on one side, allowing for heavy cuts. It could also be called a patissa, but only if the tip was a little more triangular. It also often sported a large spike coming from the hilt that could be used offensively or as another grip for a two-handed stroke. A common weapon both in Indian martial arts as well as religious art and theater. Originating as early as the 1st century AD, its shape gave an incredible advantage over other light cavalry and would make for an honorable last stand as its heavy swings tore down surrounding opponents. Normally in D&D, you get an offhand strike if you are wielding two weapons, but with the extra dagger on the end, I would say it would be interesting to wield this as a two-handed weapon and still get an offhand attack. With its reinforced blade, the weapon mastery cleave would make sense. And I thought for the same reason it could be resistant to corruption from something like a rust monster, but maybe I will add that on as a magic item at some point. Also called Gauntlet-Swords, Dandpatta is our 4th Indian-made weapon. What can I say? They loved making very interesting and decorative ways to kill people. Also shortened to just a patta, it is a double-edged sword that ranges in size, but was characterized by its hilt that took the form of a padded gauntlet and embellished with gold and silver. Most used in the 17th and 18th century, the weapon was considered an effective weapon against armored cavalry and while on horseback, being incredibly hard to disarm the weapon due to its gauntlet and its popular spinning techniques. I would say what makes these weapons unique is the extra armor on your forearms. I would say that if you're dual wielding these in D&D, you would get a bonus to your armor class. You would at least have advantage against being disarmed with it being so securely fastened to your forearms. You may have noticed that I labeled these weapons as uncommon, where all other official weapons are common. This is to give the DM an option to not include them as options for first level character creation. I do try to balance them still where I can, however. The example here is that the one downside of having your hands in sheaths would be the inability to use a free action to interact with objects, unless you sheath your sword first. Kyetsu-Shogu, also called the Meteor Hammer, was an ancient Chinese weapon that consists of a long rope or chain with a weight or ball on each end, kind of like a bola, but much slimmer and not meant for throwing. Belonging to a class of flail and chain weapons, this one specifically called for incredible dexterity and hand-eye coordination. The purpose was to bludgeon the enemy with large swings that build momentum by unraveling around the wielder's body, as well as ensnaring their enemy with the rope as well. The heavy objects on either end can be switched out for a dart or sharp objects to pierce rather than bludgeon, the weapon then being called a rope dart. One of my players in our current Spelljammer campaign actually uses meteor hammers as weapons for their monk. I think giving it reach and being able to switch out from bludgeoning to piercing would make it a unique but balanced weapon. Also giving it the topple mastery would translate it to tripping or wrapping your enemy with the rope. A flying guillotine is one of the most bizarre weapons that originated in China during the Qing Dynasty, and was later popularized in the film Master of the Flying Guillotine in Hong Kong, 1976. Imagine a hoop or disc ringed with razor blades on its edge that buzzsawed enemies as it flew. Connected by a string, you can pull it back and swing it around as you please. In its hoop form, it could be thrown over someone's head like a carnival game and yanked back hard enough to decapitate them, giving it its name. It was also popular to coat the weapon in poison. With the flying guillotine, there really is no survivors. So when making this one into a D&D weapon, I had to make it more of a magic item instead, treating it like a vorpal weapon that automatically decapitates on a natural 20. If it doesn't, you can at least slow them down with your mastery by having hooked them or cut them down very badly.
Flies, that would never happen! Oh my God! Yeah!
Speaking of flying hoops of death, a similar weapon was the Chakram, a circular blade with sharpened outer edge that was used as a throwing weapon as well as used at close range like a slashing dagger. Originally from India, it spread and had variations across Asia and Africa. Smaller ones would be worn on the wrists and used similarly to throwing darts or ninja stars. A very similar weapon was also featured in Tron Legacy, the movie. Their discs, of course, being digital but used in a very similar way. A chakari is a variation of the weapon used in martial art demos, featuring cloth, strings, and sometimes fire to show the beauty of the art. I could see similarities to the flying guillotine, so I wanted to make it as unique as possible, playing on the bouncing nature of the Tron weapons or even pulling on the fantasy of Captain America's shield, which was basically used like the Chakram. You will have the cleave ability that you can actually apply to your ranged attacks, spinning through multiple enemies at once when you throw it. Another Chinese weapon, also called the Shaolin Spade, is a polearm consisting of a spade-like blade on one end and a crescent-shaped blade on the other. It originated from Buddhist monks carrying shovels with them while traveling, which served two purposes. One would be to bury any corpse that they found on the road with the proper rites, and the other is to defend against bandits. The crescent-shaped was later added as a defense against wild dogs or leopards, pushing them away by the neck. It then evolved into stylized monk spade weapon that we have today. With the weapon being so closely tied to monks, I had to make sure that the monks could actually wield them. As you may know, monks require the weapon to be a simple weapon or have the light property in order to wield it. Staff-like weapons don't usually have the light property, so I simplified the weapon enough to keep its simple weapon nature. But I think the push weapon mastery, you can push creatures away, adding to the fantasy of keeping creatures at bay with the crescent side of your staff. The Sasumata, another Japanese polearm weapon, except this one was primarily used in police and security forces. They were to restrain and arrest suspected criminals and leave them largely uninjured, catching them around their neck or limbs. Coming in many different shapes, it often had spiked ridges and crescent-shaped ends, much like the monk spade, but never sharpened. They would also be used as a tool in firefighting, dismantling burning buildings and raising ladders. In fact, it is still used today as a citizen's weapon. A Tokyo jewelry store owner using one just in 2023 to drive off robbers. Being a weapon that apparently any untrained worker can use, I also wanted to keep this weapon to a simple status, but I gave it the topple weapon mastery to stop those escaping thieves by knocking them prone long enough to get them into custody. Another one of my favorites is the incendiary weapon used by the Byzantine Empire from the 7th to 14th centuries. Using Greek fire, or alchemist fire for D&D, they would spray it through tubes mounted on their own ships against enemy ships. Its ability to burn on water made it an effective naval weapon, sticking to the hull of the ship and burning it over the water. More of a siege weapon than anything else, it would create fires that were near impossible to put out. During this time, they would also use this Greek fire for fire arrows, grenades, and a number of different incendiaries. Now, this type of weapon is definitely not a handheld one, so instead of making it a weapon that you can wield, it is a siege weapon that can be mounted on any kind of vehicle, sending a spray of alchemist fire that keeps burning turn after turn. Now, there are a plethora of other ancient and medieval weapons and traditions that are not well known, but equally unique and powerful. What are some ancient dances or music that could inspire bards, or written cultures that it could inspire unique wizards? If you like this video and want to see more, like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what you would like to see. And as a reward to all of you who made it to the end of this video, I have all of the D&D converted weapons available to you through a link in the description. If you want the fancy PDF version, you can support me on Patreon and get all my plethora of homebrew for only a few bucks, as well as truly support what I do here on YouTube. But speaking of magic and weapons, check out this video on how to make artifacts, the most powerful of magic items, stand out within your campaign storytelling. Until next time, go out there and make your worlds a better place. See ya.